So today we are working on a 2019 Honda Civic with a 2-liter engine, and we are going to be servicing the front brakes. So the first thing you want to do is to turn the wheel so you have access to the caliper bolts. The caliper bolts are 12 millimeters. You can remove just the bottom bolt if you want and to flip the caliper up, but I'm going to remove both bolts. So we are going to flip the caliper. Let's take the caliper out. Now you want to make sure that you have enough friction material remaining before servicing. So this is roughly maybe close to 6 millimeters. This is like 6 or 7 millimeters. This is about 5 millimeters. So we're going to remove the spring clips for the brake pads and set them aside. Make sure that you note the inboard and outboard pads and to put them in the same position, because typically they are wear mated together, so you want to put everything back the same way. So if these pads don't come out, you can just use a flathead screwdriver at the very bottom to get these out without damaging the friction material. This is really stuck in there. There's a lot of rust buildup on the contact points, and it's a flaky material. So we're going to set that aside. Now it's up to you really if you want to remove the caliper bracket, but you don't have to. In most cases, you just need to service the slider pins. You service the slider pins, clean the rust here on the clips and stuff, and you can just grind down the rotor a bit with a less coarse sanding disc to clean the rotor. I'm gonna see if I'm gonna remove the caliper completely, because it's quite a bit for a brake service. You might as well just call brakes. So it's up to you on how you want to service the brakes, depending on the time and depending on how much the customer is paying you to do the service. Now most shops out there, they'll just do a quick just to lubricate the slider pins, and just a quick clean on the area and the pads, sand out the sanding down of the pads and stuff like that, and then that's it. Because really, if you're gonna take everything apart, you might as well just call the entire brake job then. So what I'm going to do, I'm probably just going to remove the clips and clean the rust down with the caliper bracket on there, and just do that instead. So one thing that you can do to inspect the calipers is to use a thin screwdriver to inspect behind the dust boot or the seal, see if there's any traces of brake fluid. Any traces of brake fluid would signify that the caliper is leaking, and you would need to replace or rebuild the caliper. So it's just the type of checks that I typically do when I have the calipers off. I just like to inspect behind the dust boot just to make sure that everything is okay. And sometimes you may see like a assembly lube grease, so that's fine. Just make sure you don't mistake that for brake fluid. So any traces of brake fluid would mean that the caliper is leaking and you would have to replace it or to rebuild it. So we're just gonna clean the back, the caliper here, clean any rust or corrosion. Now typically you can hang the caliper if you want on the strut tower if you want, or just to put it on the side here. Just make sure that you don't hang the caliper on the brake hose. So I just had the air compressor running, so we were just going to service the caliper pins or slider pins. Now typically I would clean out any rust that has accumulated on the slider pin. Now you won't be able to get every single speck of rust off of this, so just do the best you can. I'm using the green stuff Permatex silicone brake lube, so we're just going to use that. You don't want to put too much. In my previous video in which I did the rear brakes on this vehicle, I was talking about something regarding having an airlock inside the boots if you put too much grease. So I'll talk about that later on in the video after we are done. Do the bottom slider pin. Clean this up. So I'm going to remove this. Now I like to remove the rubber piece to lubricate the inside of that, and sometimes that there could be, in some cases you might have some issues with this getting stuck inside. So in some cases where you're not able to install the caliper pin back, you can discard those boots and just insert it exactly to where you got it, and you should be okay for the most part. In some cases, you can grind the rubber down a tiny bit to sand the rubber down to make it work, or replace them. If not, I haven't really seen too many issues uh, with people discarding them and just using the slider pin by itself without the rubber piece. So you should be okay. But this came out from the bottom, so make sure you put it in the bottom. The slider pins are not interchangeable, so you have to put it in the exact locations. Now, I was talking about an airlock in the system. So what I do is I typically push back on the boots after I install the caliper back to get rid of any excess grease or any air that may be inside. Because the issue is that if you have an airlock, that means that there's a presence of air inside. The fluid inside cannot circulate properly, and so there's an air bubble that's causing issues. So when that happens, when you put the brakes all back together and you go for a road test under moderate braking, the vehicle will pull onto one side, on the one that has the airlock on, or most of the airlock. So typically, that if you under moderate braking, you come to a stop, or if you slow down, if it pulls to the left, the airlock would be on the right side. If you if it pulls to the right, it will be on the left side. It will be opposite. So that's how you know in which caliper is causing the problem. So say the airlock is on the right front. This is the right front I'm working on. So say you go for a road test and you hit the brake pedal under moderate braking, and then if the airlock is on this side, the vehicle, it will pull to the left. So I learned this the hard way in my earlier years until I figured out the issue. So I just wanted to bring that up to your attention in case if you guys don't know, because if you put too much grease in here, and sometimes you'll see the rubber boots get very swollen and bulgy. So you want to make sure that you don't have any of that. And so after, when I put the caliper in, you just need to pull back on the boot just like this without damaging it, to make sure that you don't have any air or excess grease inside there. So what's next? We're probably going to clean the clips, remove the clips. We're going to sand down the pads afterwards. Just being careful to not damage the clips. Same for the other side. Make sure you put the clips in the same spots so you don't cause any issues. Now you can use like a small wire wheel or something to clean the rust on the contact points, or a wire brush is fine if you don't want to take the caliper off. Usually in some cases I take the caliper off, in other cases I don't. So you just do that. Just do a quick clean. It's just a brake service, so you don't want to spend all day cleaning and stuff when you can be doing other things. So this is just a brake service. So you just want to clean some or most of the rust off. You can use a wire brush, and that's fine. So you can just clean the clips with the die grinder. You don't want to be too aggressive with the die grinder, otherwise the clips will just fly out of your hand. So what I'm gonna do now, I'm just gonna put a little bit of lubricant on the clips. I don't want to put too much, then I'll get grease everywhere. Just a light coat of the caliper lube. And reinstall it. And again, if you don't want to do this, you can take the caliper off if you want. Up to you, really. We're gonna clean everything down afterwards, so there isn't anything to worry about. Install this just like that. You could put some caliper lube on the caliper itself before you install the clips, but that's why I put it on both sides. I don't want to do too much work for myself, so I just want to service this as needed, and that's it. So you can take some 80 grit sandpaper. I'm using the aluminum oxide sandpaper to sand down the pads. So you can just use the sandpaper to sand down the pads. So once you're done sanding down, you can use a saw blade or something to get any brake dust out of here. This is to dissipate any of the heat in the brake pads. You may not be able to sand everything down. Like here, you can see a mark still, but try your best. You don't want to overdo it either. In case if the anti-rattle clips come off or the shims come off, you just reinstall it back. So now we are going to clean the ears on the contact points on where the rust and everything is. You want to make sure that if you are cleaning the rust, if you need to chamfer down the ends to make the corners round. You don't want to make them straight, because because that's gonna cause like a sharp edge, and that could cause noise. So you don't want to do that. You want to round down the corners slightly if you need to. You can just go all around with the die grinder to clean the rust and the dust, to get rid of all the brake dust and all of that. Do the same for the inboard pad. So what I like to do, I like to spray the Permatex Disc Brake Quiet. This applies a little bit of a film on the backing of the pads to dampen any vibrations and or noise. And so a lot of shops and people like myself use this for cheap insurance to eliminate any unwanted brake noise. So shops just use this because they can't afford for comebacks and downtime. So they use this just to be on the safe side. It's not a requirement, but it's good to use on the backing of the pads in case if you run into any issues with noise for the brakes. And so we have to wait probably like 5 or 10 minutes for this to dry up before we can reinstall them. So using this helps prevent caliper hopping, excess movement of the caliper. So this is why shops use this for some problematic vehicles, but they still use it on pretty much every brake job. So now I'm just going to turn this a bit and to clean down the rust on the hub. So I'm just going to remove the rotor screw and put some anti-seize on that. So that way we don't have a hard time replacing the brakes next time in case if this rotor screw seizes up. Put some anti-seize on there. Reinstall this back. I'm just using an impact driver tool This shocks the rotor screw, so it helps. In a majority of cases, you'll be able to get it out with this tool. But in some cases, there are a variety of methods to get that out. Probably I'll probably put up a video regarding that. I'll probably put a video in the near future regarding the how to remove the rotor screws. So anyhow, just gonna wipe this down. Probably just gonna do a light sanding, very light sanding, just on the front of the rotor and maybe on the back. You don't need to do that like too much, just a little bit. Probably do a bit on the back side. You can run the die grinder on the back and do this and turn the rotor. It's okay to use the die grinder because that will give the rotor a non-directional finish, and that's what brakes need, a non-directional finish. So probably have to clean the area down, probably spray brake cleaner. You should probably do this first before you do the servicing on the clips, because then you're going to get brake dust on the clips, so because I have to wash everything down again. So I'm going to spray brake cleaner to clean the area down. I'm going to be putting some brake lube on the pads anyways, so there's going to be some lubricant on the pads and on here too, so it shouldn't be a big problem. And I clean the back. We're going to turn the wheel again. Typically I like to use the orange stuff on the contact points and the green stuff on the slider pins, but it's up to you on what you want to use really. So the brake pads have dried up, so we're going to lubricate the contact points now. I'm working somewhat late because the sun has started to go down now, but it's only like 3:15 in the afternoon, so we have shorter days now, so it gives me less time to do work. So this is the inboard. You can see the piston in this clip is facing the upper right. Usually when I install these, I install them on the inboard side, but this facing at the bottom. But on some vehicles, this will be on the top, but it doesn't really matter for as long as there's no interference. So when you install this, just make sure that the pads are loose and they move freely, because before the pad was not moving freely. So that's that inboard side now. you should be able to move this like this, so it should not be stuck or hard to move. So both pads are in. This is serviced, that's serviced. So we're just almost done. We're going to install the spring clips. You can clean the spring clips if you want. You don't have to. If there's too much rust, you can put some lubricant there if you want, but you don't need to really. And when you install this, you have to be ready to install the caliper, because then it's going to push out the pads. So some people, you can use some people have used like a C clamp to hold it down while you install this, but you don't have to do that. You don't really have to do that, but just be prepared to install the caliper. So I'll give you a better view. When you install the clips, you'll have to use one hand to hold it down, otherwise the pads are going to work its way out and the pads can fall out. So you want to hold down with the one hand as you install the spring clips. This is a spring clip because it has a spring tension to it. So if you let go, the pads, they want to move out. So you gotta hold it down. Make sure that these two ends are not too close to the rotor, otherwise they'll be dragging against the rotor. So install your caliper. Make sure that the flat side is installed properly. So we're going to install the bolts, caliper bolts. We're going to put some anti-seize. See, a tiny amount. You don't want to put too much. I'll put the torque spec for both the caliper bolts and the small caliper mounting bolts. Not able to see with the camera in the way, unfortunately. Just need to line up the caliper bolts. You want to make sure that the flat piece is inside, because if it's outside and not installed properly and you try to tighten up the bolt, it's possible to break the bolt. So you got to make sure that this is inside. See how it's flat here? So you got to make sure that this is tucked inside there. The flat end of the caliper pin needs to line up with the inside of the caliper, the same for the bottom. So tighten down the caliper bolts. So once you have completed everything, just try to move the caliper back and forth. Make sure it moves freely. It'll be a bit harder to feel because the piston hasn't been pushed in all the way, so you'll be able to feel it by hand when you are pushing it. So it'll be a bit harder to push it because the piston is not pushed in. So I was discussing about the boots. You want to push back on the boots in case if you have excess grease, because you don't want an airlock inside there, as I discussed earlier. So I want to squeeze the boots, make sure they are not swollen or bulging up or anything like that. And the same for the bottom. So once you're done, you can turn the wheel back straight. One thing I forgot to mention is that when you install the caliper, you want to make sure that the flex hose or the brake hose is running parallel to the caliper, and that it's not twisted, because if this is twisted while the caliper is installed and you go for a road test, it's possible to have a brake failure. So we want to make sure that this hose is always running parallel to the caliper when you install it. So we're all good now. Just double check your work. Make sure everything is tight. If you want to clean the brake rotor again, just in case if there's any dirt or residue, and then you should be all good to go. You can put some anti-seize here to prevent rust. Maybe I put a bit too much, but that's okay. You can spray the axle nut a little bit with some lubricant, and then you should be all good to go. You can spray some fluid film on the axle nut or whatever to prevent rust. I know the axle nuts don't get too much attention unless the axles get serviced or replaced or whatever. So that's everything for today. Have a good day and take care.